At Christmas Day, I asked my daughter about dinner. She looked at me with that practiced little smirk and said, "It's for real family only." Those words cut through me harder than any winter wind could. I stood in my kitchen, hands gripping the edge of the cold marble counter, as the golden lights of the tree blinked behind me, like they were mocking the emptiness of the house. 3 days later, the phone rang. Her voice was casual, even cheerful. "We're ready to move into the mansion. Did you send the keys?" I felt my chest tighten, but my voice stayed steady. "Oh? Didn't I mention the condition?" That was the moment everything began to shift. The moment I realized silence could no longer protect me. My name is Irene Caldwell. I am 72 years old, and until that Christmas I thought my sacrifices had meant something. I thought raising a daughter alone after burying my husband, paying her rent for years, buying her the shoes she wanted, the wedding gown she cried for, fixing her car when it broke down, all of it meant I had a place at her table. But that evening showed me the truth. To her, I was nothing but a machine to dispense money. Remember to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below if you want to hear more grandma life stories filled with emotion, betrayal, and unexpected strength. Because this is not just my story. It is the story of many mothers who give everything, only to be told they are nothing. The Christmas tree in my living room had been decorated with red ribbons and silver bells, every ornament carefully unwrapped from boxes I had saved since Robert was alive. I wanted to call Claire that morning to ask what time to come over, but something in me hesitated. When I finally gathered the courage, her words landed like a hammer. "It's for real family only." Real family. I was her mother, the woman who carried her for 9 months, who stayed awake with fevers, who signed every tuition check, who covered every foolish mistake with quiet forgiveness. And now she had the nerve to draw a line where I was left outside. I looked around my kitchen. The marble counter beneath my fingers was cold. The smell of cinnamon rolls I had baked just to feel useful lingered in the air. Outside the window, snow was falling in gentle flakes, each one a reminder of how the world kept moving even when my own heart had stopped. I wanted to cry, but the tears froze inside. I wanted to scream, but my throat was locked. Instead, I whispered to myself, "So I am not real family." For days I replayed those words. They echoed in the clinking of the ornaments, in the creak of the old rocking chair Robert once sat in. I remembered the rent payments, 36 checks of $2,000 each, $79,200 in total, poured out without question. I remembered the satin silver wedding gown that cost $1,450, the glossy Italian heels, $400 more, the repair of the SUV's gearbox, $3,800, gifts piled up over the years, every holiday, every birthday, every sudden demand. I had spent more than $86,000 on her and Nathan, and yet when Christmas came, they could not even spare a chair for me at the table. On the 5th day after that call, I was in the kitchen again when the phone rang. I lifted it, hoping maybe she had changed her mind. But no. Claire's tone was brisk, like a real estate agent closing a deal. "We're ready to move into the mansion," she said. "Did you send the keys?" My grip tightened on the receiver until my knuckles turned white. The mansion, the $10 million house Robert and I had built as a retreat, a place filled with his laughter and my prayers. To her, it was nothing but an address to claim. I inhaled slowly, forcing my voice to remain calm. "Didn't I mention the condition?" I said. She was silent for a beat, then scoffed. I hung up before she could speak again. I sat down on the oak chair and pressed my palms together. My breath was shaky, but I felt a spark in my chest. For the first time in years, I had not bent to her will. The echo of Robert's voice came back to me, a memory of him teasing me by the fireplace. "Love without respect is charity." He used to say that whenever I excused Claire's ungratefulness. That night, his words carried new weight. I realized I had been giving charity to my own daughter, mistaking it for love. The kitchen felt smaller, the walls pressing in on me. I thought about the mansion in Aspen, the cedar trees wrapped in snow, the balcony that faced the Rockies. Robert and I had shared so many evenings there, glasses of red wine in hand, watching the sky turn violet. That house was not a trophy. It was not an inheritance. It was the last piece of him I could touch. And yet Claire dared to act as if it already belonged to her, as if I had vanished from the equation. I placed the phone back on its cradle and looked around at the lonely decorations. The silence was loud. My heart pounded, not from weakness, but from something else, something I had not felt in years. Defiance. I remembered every check, every gift, every sacrifice that had been twisted into expectation. I whispered to myself, "No more." I stood, smoothing the wrinkles of my wool sweater, and walked to the window. Outside, children were laughing in the snow, their parents pulling sleds and carrying cocoa. Families together. I wondered if Claire laughed with her children that night, telling them Grandma was too old, too dull, too useless to be considered family. The thought burned my chest. I clenched my fists. For the first time, I thought maybe she was wrong. Maybe I did not have to accept this place in the shadows. The clock chimed, marking the hour. I stared at the glowing hands and felt the weight of time pressing down on me. 72 years old. I had fewer Christmases ahead than behind. Was I really going to let the last of them be spent this way? The snow outside kept falling, each flake settling quietly, layer upon layer. I understood. Justice did not come with one storm. It came with steady snow, falling piece by piece, until the ground was no longer the same. I walked to the fireplace, touched the silver frame of Robert's photo, and whispered, "I will not let them erase me." The lights on the tree flickered, and for the first time all season, I felt warmth spread through my chest. The mansion in Aspen was more than just a house. It rose from the mountain slope like it belonged to the snow itself. Walls of cedar and stone, tall windows that caught every shard of sunlight, and a dining room that opened directly to the Rockies. When Robert and I first stepped inside years ago, he whispered, "This will be our sanctuary." And that was what it became. After he passed, the empty chair at the end of the long oak table was both my comfort and my torment. I would set out 2 glasses of wine, sometimes pour just a little into his, as if that might coax his presence back into the room. The house was my refuge, a place where I could still hear his laughter in the crackle of the fireplace. Claire never understood. Or maybe she did, and simply did not care. To her, the mansion was her default inheritance, words she tossed out with the same ease as asking for money. Nathan supported the idea, nodding and adding that it would be the perfect fresh start for their family. They spoke as though I were already gone, as though I had no claim left. I was still alive, still breathing, but in their eyes, I was little more than a shadow, a placeholder, until the paperwork passed into their hands. It struck me one evening as I sat at that oak table with Robert's chair staring back at me. Perhaps in their minds, I had already been buried alongside him. I walked through the mansion slowly that week, touching the cold banister of the staircase, the curtains Robert had picked in a shade of deep burgundy. Each corner carried a memory. The cedar closet where he had hidden my Christmas gift one year, the balcony where we sat wrapped in blankets, watching shooting stars. It wasn't a house to me. It was my history, my grief, my love carved into stone and timber. And yet Claire dismissed it with a flick of her hand, claiming it as though she had built it herself. I whispered into the silence. Was I already dead in her eyes? The words trembled in the air like frost. Nathan's voice echoed in my memory. "It's too much house for one person," he had said, pacing across the living room, scanning the high ceilings as if he were measuring his empire. "You won't even use half of it." I had nodded politely then, but inside, rage was boiling. He wasn't wrong about the size, but he was wrong about the meaning. Empty rooms can still hold love. Empty chairs can still guard memories. He saw square footage. I saw a life shared and cut short. That Christmas, when Claire excluded me, I realized she had finally erased me not just from her present, but from her future. There would be no seat for me at her table, no laughter in her house, no gratitude for what I had done. And now she aimed to take the only place where my heart could still beat beside Robert's memory. I stood in the grand dining room, looking at the empty chair, and I thought, if I give this up, then I give up myself. The snow outside thickened, piling against the windows, blurring the line between inside and out. I pressed my hand against the glass and asked myself the question I had avoided for years. How much longer would I let her strip me piece by piece? A voice in me answered, sharp and clear, "You are not invisible. You are not gone. You are still here." I carried that question with me to bed that night, the blankets heavy, the house too large for my footsteps. I dreamed of Robert, his hand warm on mine, his eyes steady. He said again the phrase he had repeated so often when Claire was younger. Love without respect is charity. I woke with tears staining my pillow, realizing I had been giving charity to my own daughter, mistaking it for devotion. As dawn broke, I walked into the kitchen and brewed coffee, the smell rich and grounding. The phone sat on the counter, silent for once. I touched the receiver, half hoping Claire might call and say she regretted her words, but no apology came. Only the memory of her smirk, the dismissive tilt of her chin. It was enough to steel me. If she had already buried me in her heart, then I needed to decide whether I would let her finish the job. That morning I stood on the balcony, the Rockies spread before me, the snowfields untouched, a canvas of white. For the first time in years, I thought maybe I could draw a line too. Maybe I could say no. I asked myself quietly, if your own daughter erases you, what do you do? The answer was not yet clear, but I knew one thing. Silence had never saved me. Something in me stirred, fragile but fierce, like a flame that refuses to die even in the coldest night. The mansion stood firm against the snow, and so would I. I sat at the oak table one gray afternoon, spreading every folder, every receipt, every check stub across the polished surface. It looked less like a dining table and more like a battlefield covered with paper soldiers. My pen scratched numbers down the margin as I added each sacrifice together. 36 rent payments at $2,000 a month. $79,200. The silver satin wedding gown, $1,450. The Italian heels, $400. The gearbox repair, $3,800. Holiday gifts, birthday dinners, weekend groceries. The total crossed $86,000. My hands trembled. Each number felt like a cut, a reminder that my love had been measured only in dollars. I whispered into the quiet house, I was nothing but a dispenser. The words tasted like metal. I had allowed myself to become an endless machine, pushing out cash whenever she pressed the button. I thought of Robert's phrase again, the one he used whenever Claire demanded too much as a child. Love without respect is charity. How many times had I ignored those words, believing she would eventually change? My eyes stung as I stared at the column of figures. Instead of a ledger, it looked like a history of betrayal. In the corner of the room, a box leaned against the wall. Inside was Claire's wedding gown. She had left it here after the ceremony, promising to pick it up, but never bothering. The satin still shimmered, catching the faint light from the window. I lifted it carefully, my fingers sliding over the cold fabric. For a moment, I remembered her as a bride, her eyes glistening as she twirled in the mirror. I thought she had looked like hope itself, but now the gown mocked me, proof of money spent and respect lost. I clutched the fabric to my chest, tears spilling down my face. Was I only ever useful for this? I asked the empty room. The answer came sooner than I expected. One afternoon, the front door creaked open without a knock. Footsteps echoed on the marble floor. Claire's voice rang out casually. "Mom, we're here." Nathan followed close behind, his cologne sharp, his expression cool. They moved through the mansion as if they already owned it. Claire glanced around with narrowed eyes, taking in the high ceilings, the gleam of the chandelier. Nathan ran his hand along the back of the sofa like he was testing the furniture before buying. My chest tightened. This was my sanctuary, and yet they entered as if I were a guest. Nathan's voice broke the silence. "It's spacious, perfect for entertaining." He turned to Claire with a grin. She nodded, running her hand along the mahogany banister. "Too much for you, Mom. This house is ours eventually." Her words were smooth, practiced, like she had rehearsed them. My throat burned, but I stood tall, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Inheritance comes after death," I said, each word sharp as ice. "Last I checked, I am alive." The room went silent. Claire froze, her smirk faltering for the first time. Nathan's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking to the door. Without another word, they turned and left, their footsteps quick, their presence lingering like a shadow. I collapsed into the armchair, my breath shallow. For the first time in years, I had spoken back. The words echoed in my head. "I am alive." I had almost forgotten what it felt like to declare that. My heart pounded against my ribs, not from fear, but from a surge of something new, something fierce. For too long I had been silent, nodding, paying, obeying. That day I discovered the weight of my own voice. I walked back to the table and looked at the papers again. The receipts no longer looked like chains. They looked like evidence, proof of years of giving, proof of exploitation. I smoothed the gown back into the box, slid the papers into folders, and placed them neatly on the table. The machine was broken, the dispenser was empty. My body shook with adrenaline, but beneath it all, I felt a steady calm. For the first time, I realized the story might not end with me surrendering. It might just begin with me saying no. That evening, the house seemed different. The chandeliers sparkled more brightly, the fire burned hotter, the walls no longer pressed against me. They stood with me, strong and unyielding. I sat by the fire, staring at Robert's photo, and whispered, "I am alive." His eyes in the picture seemed to agree, steady and proud. Outside, snow fell softly, blanketing the mountain in white. Inside, a storm had started to rise in me, and I knew it would not stop here. The morning after that confrontation, I woke with my chest tight and my hands restless. The memory of Claire's smirk and Nathan's calm invasion of my space had carved a wound I could not ignore. I sat up in bed and stared at the ceiling beams Robert had chosen when we built the mansion. He had wanted the wood to feel warm, protective. That morning, they felt like witnesses, urging me to act. I whispered to myself, "No more waiting." My slippers brushed across the cold wooden floor as I rose with a strange determination. If they thought I would keep handing them everything, they were wrong. For the first time, I would not only say no, I would make it real. The first step was the doors. I called a locksmith that afternoon. He arrived in a heavy coat, his breath puffing in the cold air as he carried his tools. I guided him to every entryway, every side door, every lock that had been unchanged since Robert's passing. The sound of his drill echoed through the mansion, a jarring rhythm that made my heart pound. With each lock replaced, I felt a piece of my control return. The locksmith handed me a new set of keys, cold metal pressing into my palm. I closed my fingers tightly around them. For years, Claire had walked into this house as if it already belonged to her. Not anymore. The doors were mine again. The next step led me into the city, to the bank I had trusted for 30 years. The marble floor was gleaming, the air crisp with the scent of polished wood. Mr. Hanley, the manager, recognized me instantly. His gray hair was neatly combed, his suit immaculate. He shook my hand warmly, but his eyes carried concern. "What brings you in, Mrs. Caldwell?" I sat across from him at the wide desk, my purse heavy with documents. My voice shook at first, but I forced myself to speak. "I need to stop all transfers to my daughter and her husband." His eyebrows rose. He leaned back, studying me carefully. "May I ask why?" My fingers fumbled with the papers as I laid them out. The receipts, the checks, the numbers I had tallied just days earlier. 36 months of rent, I said. $79,200, plus the car repairs, the wedding gown, the gifts, more than $86,000 in total. And yet she cut me out of Christmas. She told me I wasn't real family. Hanley's eyes darkened. He pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose and spoke firmly. "This is elder exploitation." The words rang in the air like a bell. I felt my throat tighten, my chest constrict. Someone else had said it out loud, not me excusing it, not me minimizing it. A professional, a witness. He slid a stack of papers across the desk, documents to cancel every standing order I had created. My hand shook as I lifted the pen. For a moment, I hesitated, memories of Claire's childhood flickering in my mind, her small hands clapping on her 5th birthday, her excited squeal when I bought her first pair of skates. But those memories had been weaponized into entitlement. My hand steadied. I signed the first page, then another. Each signature felt like breaking a chain I had worn too long. Hanley watched quietly, his face solemn. When I finished the final page, he placed his hand over the folder and said gently, "This is the first step." His words were not just professional courtesy, they were recognition. He saw me not as a fragile old woman, but as someone reclaiming her ground. I exhaled a breath I had been holding for years. The pen clattered softly onto the desk. My fingers no longer trembled. Walking out of the bank, I felt the winter sun strike my face. It was pale, but it was there, glinting off the snow piled along the sidewalks. My boots crunched against the ice as I clutched the folder of canceled transfers against my chest. For years, money had flowed from me like blood from a vein, always outward, never returned. Now, the bleeding had stopped. The silence of that moment was louder than any applause. I felt taller, though my shoulders were bent with age. I felt lighter, though the folder weighed heavy in my bag. When I reached the mansion again, I paused at the front door. The new lock gleamed in the late afternoon light. I slid the key in slowly, deliberately, and turned it. The click of the bolt sliding into place echoed in my chest. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me, with a finality that sent a shiver up my spine. The house was mine again, not just in name, but in control. No more footsteps without knocking, no more demands disguised as love. For the first time since Robert's passing, I felt like I was protecting both his memory and myself. I stood in the foyer, the silence wrapping around me. My hand brushed the frame of Robert's photo on the side table. "I did it," I whispered. His eyes in the picture seemed to hold approval, steady and warm. My breath shook as I laughed softly, a sound I had not heard from myself in a long time. It was the laugh of someone who had survived a storm and found the ground still under her feet. The walls of the mansion seemed to breathe with me, stronger now, less haunted. I knew this was only the beginning, but beginnings mattered. I had taken the first step out of the shadow and into my own strength. The evening was quiet, snow stilling the world outside, when the doorbell rang. I had just poured myself a cup of chamomile tea, the steam rising in gentle curls when the chime cut through the silence. My stomach tightened. Guests were rare, especially uninvited ones. I set the cup down and walked to the door, my slippers whispering across the hardwood. When I opened it, the sight froze me. Claire stood tall, wrapped in a fur-lined coat, Nathan just behind her, and beside them a man I didn't know. His suit was dark, his briefcase polished, his smile rehearsed. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said smoothly, extending a hand. "Mr. Keene, I'm here to help." Help. The word dripped with poison. Claire didn't wait for an invitation. She brushed past me, her perfume sharp, her heels striking the marble floor. Nathan followed, his eyes darting across the room like a buyer surveying property. Keene stepped in last, his movements controlled, his eyes calculating. I closed the door slowly, my heart pounding. I knew instantly this was not a visit. This was an ambush. We gathered in the living room. The fire was burning, but the air felt cold. Claire sat on the sofa, legs crossed, a small smirk tugging at her lips. Nathan leaned against the mantel, casual but smug. Keene placed his briefcase on the coffee table and opened it with a snap. He spoke in a tone coated with honey. "We've been concerned, Mrs. Caldwell. Managing finances, properties, responsibilities. It's a lot for someone at your stage of life. Claire and Nathan simply want to make sure you're protected." Protected? I stared at him, words caught in my throat. Claire tilted her head, her smile widening. "Mom, It's not safe for you to handle everything alone. You've already been so generous. Let us take care of things from now on." Nathan chimed in, his voice smooth but empty. "Family helping family. That's all this is." His hand brushed a photo of Robert and me on the mantel. I wanted to snatch it away, but I held still. The fire popped in the grate, and the sound echoed like gunfire in the tense silence. I forced myself to speak, my voice low but firm. "What I need protection from is you." The words fell heavy in the room. Claire's smirk faltered, only for a moment, before she quickly recovered. Nathan shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. Keen's smile never broke, but his eyes narrowed ever so slightly. He closed his briefcase with a soft click and rose to his feet. "We'll take care of things soon," he said politely, as if promising a favor rather than a threat. Claire stood, brushing imaginary dust from her sleeve. "It's only a matter of time, Mom. You'll see." Nathan gave a short nod, avoiding my eyes. Together they walked to the door, their steps echoing against the marble like a countdown. I followed, my chest rising and falling rapidly. I did not open the door for them. They opened it themselves, stepping out into the night as if they owned not only the mansion, but my future as well. The door clicked shut behind them, and I pressed my back against it. My hands trembled, not from fear alone, but from fury. They weren't just demanding anymore. They were organizing. They were building a case, a strategy, and they thought I was too weak, too old, too fragile to fight. I walked back to the living room, the fire still burning, but I felt no warmth. The shadows stretched long across the walls, wrapping around me like warnings. I sat in Robert's chair, my hands gripping the armrests. His voice came back to me again, steady, grounding. "Love without respect is charity." I realized now that their charity was a lie. What they wanted was control, masked as concern. They wanted to declare me unfit, to place everything I had built into their names. I stared into the fire, the flames leaping and snapping, and whispered, "Not yet, not ever." And the clock on the mantel struck, the chimes sharp in the silence. I knew then that the battle was no longer private. It would not end at the front door. This was going to court. This was going to war in a place where words and signatures carried more weight than fists. I leaned back, my breath steadying, my resolve hardening. They thought they had already won, but they had forgotten one thing. I was still alive. The days after that visit felt heavier than the snow piling on the roof. I drifted from room to room inside the mansion, every creak of the floor reminding me I was alone. The silence was suffocating, pressing into my chest until I could hardly breathe. I needed air. I needed voices that weren't Claire's or Nathan's or that lawyer's polished threats. One afternoon, I slipped on my coat, wrapped a scarf around my neck, and drove into town. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, but something in me knew I couldn't stay locked away, waiting for the next blow. The library sat at the edge of Main Street, its stone steps covered in a dusting of snow. A poster in the window caught my eye, Community Book Club. All are welcome. I hesitated, fingers tight around the strap of my purse. I hadn't joined anything in years. I hadn't felt welcome anywhere outside these walls. Still, I pushed the door open. Warmth and the faint smell of paper wrapped around me. A handful of people sat in a circle of chairs near the fireplace, their voices weaving together in gentle conversation. I slid into a chair near the back, clutching my bag to my chest. They were discussing a novel I hadn't read, their words floating around me. I nodded when eyes turned my way, but I felt like an intruder. I thought about leaving, about slipping out before anyone noticed. But then, a woman with silver hair and kind, sharp eyes caught my gaze. She rose and walked over, her steps steady, her presence commanding without effort. She sat beside me and smiled. "First time?" she asked softly. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. Her name was Eleanor Whitmore. She had the kind of calm that comes only from surviving storms. We spoke quietly while the group carried on. Somehow, in only a few questions, she drew the truth out of me. My voice cracked as I whispered about Claire, about the Christmas dinner, about the mansion they wanted to claim. I told her I had been cut out, erased, turned into nothing but a checkbook. Tears slipped down my cheeks before I could stop them. I expected pity, but Eleanor only nodded, her eyes fierce. "You're not the first," she said. "I went through the same thing. My son nearly bled me dry before I learned to say no." Her words jolted me. Not the first. I wasn't alone. She leaned closer, her voice low but unwavering. "Close the bank. Let them stumble. If they can't stand on their own, that's their problem." I listened, my breath shallow, my heart hammering. She spoke with the certainty of someone who had lived it, who had drawn her own line in the snow and refused to move. 6 months, she said. 6 months of saying no, and you'll see who they really are. I wiped my tears, the room blurring. Eleanor's hand rested lightly on mine. "Roses need thorns," she whispered. "Without them, they're just flowers waiting to be plucked. You've been a rose without thorns too long." Her words sank deep, wrapping around the ache in my chest. I thought of all the years I had let Claire pluck every petal, leaving me bare. Maybe it was time to grow the thorns I had denied myself. We sat together for the rest of the meeting. I didn't speak much, but I listened. When laughter rose, I found myself smiling faintly. When books were passed around, I accepted one, the weight of it solid in my hands. As the meeting ended, Eleanor scribbled a number on a slip of paper and pressed it into my palm. "Call me," she said. "Any time." Her eyes held mine, steady and unwavering. I nodded, my throat too tight for words. Walking back to my car, the evening sky stretched wide, painted in shades of lavender and gold. My boots crunched in the snow, each step echoing louder in my chest. I had found something I hadn't expected. A friend, an ally, someone who understood the hollow wound of being betrayed by your own child. I slid into the driver's seat and held the slip of paper in my hand. For the first time in weeks, the crushing weight on my chest lifted just enough for me to breathe. That night in the mansion, I sat by the fire with the book the group had chosen. The words blurred as my thoughts circled Eleanor's. "Roses need thorns." I repeated it again and again until the phrase felt like armor, until I believed it might apply to me. I wasn't just a dispenser. I wasn't invisible. I could be a thorn if I chose to be. I looked at Robert's photo on the mantel, his eyes steady as ever. "Maybe I can do this," I whispered, and in the quiet glow of the fire, I almost believed it. The envelope arrived on a cold Tuesday morning. I had been sipping coffee by the window, watching the snow fall in thick, quiet sheets, when the mail carrier trudged up the drive. I opened the door and felt the sting of icy air against my face as he handed me a thick, official-looking packet. My hand shook before I even saw the seal. Something in me knew. I closed the door, sat at the dining table, and slid my finger under the flap. The paper spilled out, heavy and cruel. At the top, in bold letters, "Petition for guardianship." My breath caught. Claire and Nathan had filed to declare me incapable of handling my own life. The room tilted as I read. They had built an entire case against me, stacking lies into towers meant to collapse on my head. First was a statement from Boyd, my neighbor. He claimed I often shouted nonsense in my yard, frightening him. I could picture him, leaning on his porch railing, smirking as he signed the lie. Then came Ms. Patel, the pharmacist. She swore I fumbled with prescriptions, confused about dosage. I remembered her eyes darting nervously whenever Claire entered the store. Now I understood why. And at the bottom was a report signed by Dr. Kelman, a psychiatrist I had never met. He wrote that I suffered from memory decline and inability to manage property. My hands clenched around the paper. He had never spoken a word to me. His diagnosis was nothing but ink bought and paid for. I pressed my palm against my chest, trying to steady my breath. My heart hammered as if it wanted to break free from my ribs. My coffee sat untouched, cooling into bitterness. The edges of the pages blurred with the tears I tried to blink away. To see it all written so formally, stamped with authority, made me feel small, erased. On paper, I was already incompetent. On paper, I was already gone. My own daughter had built a coffin out of lies and slipped my name inside. I stood and paced the living room, the papers still clenched in my fist. The chandelier above swayed faintly with each heavy step. I stopped at the fireplace, staring at Robert's photo. His eyes seemed to watch me, steady but sorrowful. "They want to erase me," I whispered, my voice hoarse. Saying it aloud made the weight heavier. The mansion around me, once a fortress, now felt like a courtroom where every wall whispered accusations. My knees weakened, and I sank into the armchair, clutching the papers to my chest as though I could crush the lies into dust. Hours passed with the documents spread before me on the table. Every word branded me as unfit. Every page painted me as fragile, senile, broken. I read them again and again, each time hoping the words would change, each time finding the same betrayal. My hands turned cold, my fingers stiff. I wrapped myself in Robert's old wool blanket, but no warmth reached me. I whispered over and over, "I am not gone, I am not gone. I am." The house echoed back nothing. The fear seeped into every corner of me. What if they won? What if a judge believed these lies? What if the mansion slipped from my grasp, my accounts frozen, my choices signed away? The thought of Claire holding my keys, Nathan standing in this living room as master, it hollowed me. I saw myself in some small room, stripped of control, watching strangers decide when I could eat, when I could breathe. My stomach churned, bile rising. I pressed a hand over my mouth, fighting the nausea. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and indifferent. Inside, I felt the ground beneath me breaking. I gathered the papers into a neat stack, forcing them into their envelope, as if closing it might undo the words. But the damage had already been done. They had fired their first true shot, and it landed deep. My reflection in the window looked pale, fragile, exactly the woman they wanted the world to see. I turned away, unable to face her. I carried the envelope upstairs and placed it on Robert's empty chair at the dining table. Like laying down a burden I could no longer hold. My chest ached, my throat raw. I pressed my forehead against the cool wood of the table, eyes closed tight. The silence of the house wrapped around me, heavy as stone. For the first time since Robert's funeral, I felt utterly powerless. My daughter had drawn the battle lines, and she had chosen weapons I did not know how to fight. That night, I could not sleep. The papers lay on the table like a shadow that would not lift, their weight heavier than any storm outside. I tossed beneath the blankets, my breath shallow, my mind circling the same fear. They had turned me into a ghost while I was still breathing. At last, close to midnight, I rose. My body moved without thought, pulling on my coat, sliding into boots. The keys jingled in my trembling hands. I needed to see Robert. I needed the ground where his name was carved, because mine felt as if it were being erased. The drive to the cemetery cut through the silent town. Snow fell in steady veils, catching in the headlights. The roads wound upward, lonely and slick, each turn carrying me farther from the warmth of home and deeper into the cold truth of my life. My knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. I whispered his name, over and over, as though it might guide me safely to him. When I finally pulled into the cemetery gates, the world was nothing but white and gray. The gravestones stood like sentinels in the snow. I trudged through the drifts until I reached his marker. The stone was dusted in white, the letters faint under the frost. Robert Caldwell, beloved husband and father. My knees buckled. I fell into the snow, my hands sinking into the frozen earth. Tears blurred my vision as I pressed my palm to the cold stone. "Our own daughter calls me incompetent," I choked out. My breath rose in clouds, mingling with the night air. I leaned my forehead against the stone, letting the chill seep into me, punishing me for believing love would be enough. The cemetery was silent, but for the whistle of the wind through bare trees. My sobs were swallowed by the night. I remembered Robert's voice, steady, kind, always guiding. Love without respect is charity. How many times had he warned me, gently, that giving without boundaries would only end in ruin? I thought I was stronger than that truth. I thought Claire's heart would eventually open. But here I was, kneeling in snow, discarded like yesterday's receipt. I felt useless, a relic of a life no one valued. My hands clawed at the frozen ground, nails breaking against ice. My breath turned ragged, the cold searing my lungs. I whispered, "I am nothing." The words tore me open. Images flashed in my mind. Claire as a little girl clutching my hand on her first day of school, her laughter when Robert pushed her on the swing, her eyes shining as I fastened the veil on her wedding day. How had those moments curdled into this? How had love become ammunition? The wind rose suddenly, fierce and sharp, howling through the branches. It pushed against my back, whipping my scarf, pulling at my coat. It felt like a command, urgent and wild. "Stand up." I pressed my palms harder into the snow, resisting. My body was heavy, my heart heavier, but the wind would not relent. It howled again, louder, rushing through the cemetery like a voice I almost recognized. I closed my eyes, and in that roar, I heard him, Robert, not gentle this time, but insistent. "Get up, Irene. Do not let them bury you alive." I lifted my head, my tears freezing on my cheeks. My hands dug into the snow until they ached, until I felt the strength in the ache. I wasn't gone yet. My heart still beat, wild and uneven, but it beat. I pushed myself upright, the wool of my coat stiff with frost, my knees stinging. I placed both hands flat on Robert's stone and whispered, "I will not give them everything. Not yet." The words were shaky, but they existed. They cut through the night like a spark. The drive back was slow, the roads nearly invisible under snow, but something had changed inside me. I kept one hand on the wheel, the other gripping the edge of Robert's scarf I always carried in the car. The fear hadn't vanished, but it was no longer the only thing in me. There was something else now, a tiny ember that refused to die. When I reached the mansion, the lights glowed faintly in the windows, waiting. I stepped inside, shedding snow from my boots, and stood in the silence. My hands were raw, my face wet, my body exhausted. But I was standing. That was enough for tonight. I barely slept after returning from the cemetery. The house was silent, yet my thoughts roared like a storm. Every shadow in the mansion felt alive. Every creak of the old beams sounded like a warning that time was slipping away. I sat at the dining table with the envelope of court papers in front of me, my hands shaking as I traced the edges. Fear clung to me, but beneath it was something else, something rising from the embers Robert had stirred in my heart. If I did nothing, I would prove them right. If I stayed silent, they would bury me long before death. I stared at the empty chair across from me, his chair, and whispered, "I won't let you down." Memories came flooding, uninvited and sharp. Claire as a child, running barefoot through the yard, her laughter carrying on the summer breeze. Claire at 13, crying into my shoulder when she failed her first exam. Claire at 18, her eyes bright with dreams as we drove to college together. How had that girl become the woman who filed these papers against me? The ache of betrayal was deep, but tangled in it was grief. For the daughter I once believed I had, for the bond I thought unbreakable. I pressed my fists to my temples and breathed through the pain. Love had blinded me too long. Love had let me hand over my life piece by piece. No more. The clock struck 2 a.m. when I reached for the slip of paper Eleanor had given me. Her handwriting was firm, steady, the ink slightly smudged where she had pressed too hard. I stared at the numbers, my fingers trembling over the phone. My pride whispered not to call, not to expose my weakness, but my heart knew I couldn't do this alone. I dialed before I could talk myself out of it. The line rang once, twice, and then her voice came, warm but alert even at this hour. "Irene?" My breath caught. "Eleanor, I don't know what to do. They're trying to take everything. They've made me into someone I'm not." My voice cracked, tears spilling despite myself. She listened in silence, not rushing, not pitying. When I finished, she said only, "You don't need fear. You need strategy." Her words hit me like a spark in the darkness. Strategy, not fear. She told me about a lawyer she trusted, a man who fought cases like mine, who exposed families that preyed on their own. Donovan Pike. Call him, she urged. He'll see you for who you are, not who they say you are. After we hung up, I sat for a long moment, the phone heavy in my hand. My reflection in the dark window looked pale, tired, but there was a glimmer in my eyes I hadn't seen in years. I searched for Donovan's number, found it, and pressed dial before my courage dissolved. He answered on the second ring, his voice low, measured. This is Donovan Pike. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then the words tumbled out, about Christmas, about the mansion, about the petition for guardianship. He let me finish without interrupting. When I finally fell silent, he said calmly, You are not alone, and you are not powerless. We'll meet tomorrow. Gather everything you have, documents, receipts, anything. We'll need evidence, not tears. Evidence, not tears. I repeated the phrase to myself as I hung up. My hands were still shaking, but now from adrenaline, not despair. I rose from the table and moved through the house, gathering folders, receipts, photographs. I stacked them neatly on the dining table, every paper a brick in a wall I would build to protect myself. My body ached with exhaustion, but my spirit felt strangely awake. For the first time since Claire's betrayal, I was not drowning. I was swimming towards something, however distant it seemed. Before dawn, I stood on the balcony overlooking the snow-covered mountains. The sky was pale gray, the first light breaking at the horizon. I wrapped Robert's scarf around my shoulders and breathed in the cold air. The mansion stood solid beneath me, the mountains steady beyond. I whispered into the wind, I will fight. The words did not tremble this time. They rang out clear, carried into the morning like a vow. The next morning, the mansion no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like a war room. I laid every folder, receipt, and record across the dining table, each piece of paper a weapon I had never realized I owned. When Donovan Pike arrived, his knock was firm, his presence steady. He stepped inside, his long coat dusted with snow, and looked around the house with quiet respect before sitting across from me. His eyes were sharp but kind, the kind that measured not only facts, but people. He didn't treat me like a frail old woman. He treated me like a client ready to fight. I pushed the stack of papers toward him. My hands trembled, but my voice was steady. Here. Years of payments. Rent, repairs, clothes, gifts, all of it. He began to read, flipping through the receipts methodically. Now and then his eyebrows rose, his pen making quick notes in the margin. $79,200 in rent, he muttered. A wedding gown for $1,450, car repairs at $3,800, gifts totaling over $86,000. He set the pen down and met my eyes. This isn't generosity. This is a pattern. This is financial exploitation. Hearing it put so plainly sent a shiver through me. For years I had called it love, called it duty, called it motherhood. He called it exploitation. My throat tightened, but I held his gaze. Can we fight this? I asked, my voice no louder than a whisper. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. We won't fight with emotion. We'll fight with proof. And we'll need more than receipts. We'll need confirmation of your competence. The court will try to paint you as incapable. We have to dismantle that lie. He paused, then added, I know a man, Dr. Howard. He's meticulous, objective. His word carries weight. If you're willing, he'll evaluate you. The thought made my stomach clench. What if I failed? What if fear twisted my words, made me stumble, made me look exactly as they wanted me to? My breath quickened. And if I don't pass? He shook his head firmly. You will, because I've been listening to you for 20 minutes, and you're sharper than half the people I argue against in court. Trust yourself. His confidence was steady, a rope thrown across a chasm. I grabbed it. The next day, I met Dr. Howard in a quiet office lined with shelves of books. He wore a gray suit, his glasses low on his nose, his demeanor crisp and professional. He didn't smile, but he didn't frown either. He explained the evaluation would take time, tests of memory, problem-solving, calculations. My palms were damp, my throat dry, but I nodded. The first test was simple: recall a series of words. I closed my eyes, repeating them silently until they rooted in my mind. Later, he asked me to subtract numbers, to explain a proverb, to solve a puzzle with blocks. My hands trembled, but my mind refused to bend. With each answer, I felt a flicker of strength. I was not what Claire claimed. I was not broken. 2 hours later, he set his pen down. "Mrs. Caldwell, your results are above average for your age group. There is no evidence of cognitive decline." His words were clinical, but to me, they were gold. My chest swelled, tears welling in my eyes. I clutched the written report he handed me, the ink fresh, the signature bold. Proof. Undeniable proof. I pressed the paper to my chest and whispered, "Thank you." For the first time in weeks, relief washed through me like sunlight breaking the clouds. When I returned home, Donovan was waiting. I handed him the report with trembling hands. He read it quickly, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "This is our shield," he said. He added it to the stack of receipts, the growing fortress of evidence on the table. Then he looked at me with calm certainty. "We're ready." His words rang in the room, strong and final. That night I sat by the fire with Robert's photo on the mantel. I touched the glass gently, tears slipping down my cheeks. "I did it," I whispered. "I proved them wrong." The flames danced, warm and alive, reflecting in my eyes. For the first time in years, I felt not like a burden, but like a woman standing on her own ground. The fear was still there, but it was no longer alone. It had a companion now, strength, and that strength was growing. The days after the evaluation blurred into a rhythm of preparation. Donovan returned to the mansion with his briefcase and his calm voice, and together we built a fortress of evidence. The dining table, once used for family dinners, was now covered in files, affidavits, photos, and reports. Each document was a brick, each signature a stone. I had never felt so weary, but I had also never felt so certain. This time, the walls were mine. We started with security. Donovan insisted the house be documented. I called a company and had cameras installed along the gates, the porch, the hallways. Their tiny lenses blinked red, recording every corner Claire once claimed as her own. Watching the footage later, I saw myself walking through the rooms, steady, deliberate. Proof, captured in time, that I was not the confused woman they described. Each recording was another shield. Next came the agreement Robert and I had drafted years ago, tucked away in the bottom drawer of my desk. A no-claim agreement, written when he was still alive. A safeguard against anyone trying to seize what wasn't theirs before its time. My fingers trembled as I slid the document across the table to Donovan. His eyes scanned it, then he looked up with a spark of approval. "This shows foresight. It shows you planned ahead. That kind of clarity is invaluable." He placed it carefully atop the stack. But paper alone would not be enough. We needed voices. Donovan contacted Eleanor and the women from the book club. They did not hesitate. One by one, they signed affidavits swearing to my clarity, to my steady presence, to the conversations we had shared in detail. Eleanor arrived at the mansion with tears in her eyes as she handed me the signed statement. "You are not alone," she said firmly. Her hand squeezed mine, and for the first time in months, I believed her. At night, I practiced my testimony in the mirror. My reflection was lined and tired, but my eyes held something new. I spoke the words aloud. I managed my finances. I stopped the transfers. I recognized manipulation. Each sentence was an anchor. I stumbled sometimes, my voice catching, but each repetition grew stronger. Donovan listened patiently, correcting me when my voice wavered, reminding me to stand tall, to breathe, to look the judge directly in the eye. "Truth carries weight," he told me, "but only if spoken without fear." The mansion became a crucible. Days melted into nights of preparation. I drank too much coffee, ate too little, slept in fragments. Yet beneath the exhaustion was a current of fire, the kind I hadn't felt since Robert was alive. I carried his photo from room to room, setting it near me as I practiced, as if he were watching, nodding. I could almost hear him say, "You're ready, Irene. You've always been ready." On the eve of the hearing, the house was silent, but for the crackle of the fire. I stepped onto the balcony, the mountains looming under a blanket of stars. The air was sharp, the kind that stung the lungs but cleared the mind. I wrapped Robert's scarf tighter around my shoulders. Below me, the mansion stood solid, no longer a burden but a shield. I whispered into the night, "The machine is broken. I am not a dispenser. I am alive." My breath drifted in the cold, carrying the words into the dark sky. Inside, the folders were packed neatly into Donovan's briefcase, affidavits signed, reports ready. Everything was in place. Tomorrow, I would step into the courtroom not as a frightened mother, but as a woman armed with truth. Fear still sat in the corners of my heart, but it no longer ruled me. I had turned it into fuel. I sat by the fire one last time, my fingers brushing the edges of Robert's photo, and I felt something steady bloom inside me. The storm was coming, but for the first time, I was not hiding from it. I was walking into it head on. The courthouse loomed against the winter sky, its stone walls rising pale and stern. My heart pounded as Donovan guided me through the heavy doors, the air inside sharp with the smell of polished wood and paper. People filled the benches, their murmurs blending into a low hum that made my head swim. Claire and Nathan were already there, sitting side by side at the plaintiff's table. Claire's chin was lifted, her smile smug, as though she had already won. Nathan's hand rested over hers, his eyes cold, scanning the room. Beside them sat Keene, his suit immaculate, his expression smooth and predatory. I felt my knees weaken, but Donovan's steady presence at my side anchored me. "We're ready," he whispered. I nodded, clutching Robert's scarf tight in my hand. When the judge entered, the room rose in unison. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. The proceedings began. Keene spoke first, his voice oily, practiced. He painted me as a fragile widow, overwhelmed by grief, unable to manage a mansion or her finances. He held up the petition, waived the testimonies from Boyd, Patel, and Kelman. Boyd described me as a woman shouting nonsense in the yard. Patel claimed I confused medications. Kelman, who had never laid eyes on me, declared I was suffering from decline. Each lie twisted the knife deeper. The crowd shifted uneasily, eyes darting toward me with pity, with doubt. My throat tightened, but I sat still, my hands folded in my lap. Donovan had warned me, "Let them speak. Let their words sink. Then we strike." When it was Donovan's turn, he rose calmly, his presence commanding without theatrics. He began by questioning Boyd. The man stumbled under pressure, unable to explain why his observations only occurred when Claire was present. Next, Patel admitted Claire had pressured her, her voice breaking as she confessed the truth. The courtroom gasped. Donovan pressed further, exposing Kelman's false report, forcing him to admit he had never conducted a single examination. With each revelation, the pillars of their case cracked. Claire's smirk faltered. Nathan's grip on her hand tightened. Then Donovan called Dr. Howard. The doctor strode forward with quiet authority, presenting his report. His voice was steady as he explained his evaluation in detail. Every test I had passed, every answer recorded. He concluded with a simple statement. Mrs. Caldwell is not only competent, but she demonstrates clarity above the average for her age. He handed the report to the judge, the pages heavy with undeniable truth. Relief surged through me, hot and blinding. I gripped the scarf tighter, tears burning my eyes. Donovan wasn't finished. He pulled from his briefcase the no-claim agreement Robert and I had signed years earlier. He laid it before the court, explaining how it demonstrated not confusion, but foresight. "This woman prepared for exactly this," he said. "She is not weak, she is wise." The judge studied the document, his brow furrowed. Claire shifted uncomfortably, her earlier confidence draining like water through a sieve. Finally, Donovan looked at me. Would you like to speak? My legs trembled as I rose, every eye in the courtroom fixed on me. I stepped forward, clutching Robert's scarf, and let the silence settle. My voice wavered at first, but then it steadied, carrying across the room. For years, I gave without question. 36 rent payments, $79,200. A gown, a pair of shoes, repairs, gifts. More than $86,000. I thought it was love, but I was nothing but a dispenser. My voice cracked, but I pressed on, stronger. The machine is broken. I am free. I am alive. The room fell silent. The words echoed, filling every corner of the chamber. Claire's face went pale, her lips parted as if to protest, but no sound came. Nathan's eyes dropped to the table, shame flickering across his features. Keene shifted in his seat, his polished confidence gone. The judge leaned forward, his gaze steady on me. Then the gavel struck once, twice. "The petition for guardianship is denied," he declared. His voice was firm, final. Mrs. Caldwell retains full control of her estate and her life. The sound of the gavel reverberated through me, louder than thunder. I exhaled, my body trembling, tears streaming freely now. Donovan placed a hand on my shoulder, grounding me. Eleanor, sitting in the back row, dabbed her eyes, her smile wide and proud. For the first time in a long time, the weight crushing my chest lifted. I had not been erased. I had stood my ground. I had won. As the courtroom emptied, I remained still for a moment, breathing in the air that no longer felt suffocating. I whispered under my breath, "Robert, we did it." And in the quiet that followed, I felt as though he was there, steady and proud, reminding me that love with respect is not charity, it is strength. The hallway outside the courtroom was lined with echoes of footsteps and whispers, but all I could hear was the echo of the gavel. It rang in me like a bell of freedom, striking again and again, scattering the weight I had carried for so long. Claire stumbled out of the courtroom, her face pale, her lips pressed thin. Nathan walked beside her, his shoulders slumped, eyes fixed on the ground. They didn't look at me. They couldn't. Their silence was louder than any insult they had ever thrown. For once, they had nothing left to demand. I walked slowly, deliberately, each step heavy with release. Donovan was at my side, his briefcase in one hand, his other hand resting gently on my arm. "You stood your ground," he said, his voice steady. I nodded, unable to speak, my throat thick with the weight of victory. Eleanor was waiting near the doors, her eyes bright with tears. She reached for me, clasping both my hands tightly. "You did it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You showed them you were stronger than they ever believed." I smiled faintly, a small curve of my lips that felt like the first sunlight after a storm. We stepped out into the cold air of Aspen. Snowflakes drifted gently from the sky, soft against my skin. The courthouse behind me seemed smaller now, just a building, no longer a fortress where my life could be stolen. I inhaled deeply, the air crisp and sharp in my lungs, and for the first time in months, I felt light. The scarf around my shoulders warmed me, Robert's familiar wool carrying me forward. I lifted my face to the sky and let the snow kiss my cheeks. The world was the same, yet everything inside me had shifted. Claire and Nathan stood a short distance away, arguing in hushed tones. Their words were sharp, brittle, cracking like ice ready to break. I didn't move toward them. I didn't need to. Their downfall was already written in their own desperation. I turned away, letting them fade into the crowd, no longer tethered to my every breath. For years I had walked with my head bent, my heart chained to their demands. Now I lifted my chin, each step carrying me farther from their shadows. Eleanor slipped her arm through mine as we walked to her car. "How do you feel?" she asked softly. I paused, searching for the words. "Free," I said simply. The word felt strange, foreign, but it was true. Free from being a dispenser, free from the weight of silence, free from the fear of being erased. Donovan joined us, his breath a cloud in the cold air. "This isn't just a win in court," he said. "This is your life back." His words struck deep, and I felt tears rise again, but this time they weren't heavy. They were light, cleansing. As we drove away, I looked back one last time at the courthouse steps. Claire stood there, her coat pulled tight, her eyes burning holes into me. For a fleeting moment, I saw the little girl she once was, the child who used to reach for my hand. Then the vision dissolved, replaced by the woman who tried to bury me alive on paper. I turned my gaze forward, refusing to carry her weight any longer. The road stretched ahead, winding through the snow, and for the first time in years, I wanted to follow it. That evening, back at the mansion, I lit the fireplace and sat in Robert's chair. The flames danced, casting warm light on the walls that had once felt like prison bars. Now they glowed with freedom. Eleanor sat beside me, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. Donovan raised a glass of water in quiet salute. I held my scarf tighter and whispered, "I am free." The words were not for the court, not for Claire, not even for Eleanor or Donovan. They were for me, for the woman who had been silenced, dismissed, erased, and who now stood tall once more. In the weeks after the hearing, the mansion felt different. It was no longer haunted by fear of losing it, no longer a prize dangled over my head by those who called themselves family. Instead, it stood as a question. Did I truly want to keep living in this fortress of memories, or was I ready to breathe somewhere new? I wandered the halls day after day, running my fingers along the cedar beams, the stone hearth, the tall windows Robert had loved. Every room carried his voice, his laughter, his wisdom. But the house also carried Claire's shadow now, her demands, her smirks, her threats. The memories of love and the wounds of betrayal were tangled too tightly here. I knew what I had to do. I called Donovan one morning and asked him to meet me at the mansion. When he arrived, I sat him down at the dining table, the place where we had built my case. My voice was steady, calm. "I want to sell the house," I said. He blinked in surprise, but then he nodded slowly. "Are you sure?" I looked out the window at the snow covering the grounds where Robert and I once walked together. "Yes, this house saved me. It protected me. But now, I want my freedom to live outside its walls." His eyes softened, and he gave a small smile. "Then let's make it happen." News spread quickly through town. A $10 million estate listed by a widow who had just fought off her daughter in court. People whispered, speculated, judged. But for me, each whisper was another sign I had chosen correctly. I wasn't clinging anymore. I was letting go. Within weeks, buyers came forward. The contract was signed, the keys handed over, the title no longer mine. I drove away from the mansion for the last time with Robert's scarf around my shoulders and no regrets pressing on my heart. For the first time in decades, I wasn't tied to a building or to expectations. I was tied only to myself. With the sale finalized, I took a portion of the money and did something Claire would never understand. I donated $1.5 million to a fund that fought elder exploitation. My hands trembled as I signed the check, not from weakness, but from pride. The woman who had been treated like a dispenser had chosen where her money went. It wasn't extracted from me. It was given freely, to protect others like me. I imagined the faces of those women and men who might one day be saved by that fund, and I felt Robert's presence beside me, his steady hand on mine. The rest I used to carve a new life. I found a small condo by the lake, sunlight streaming through its windows each morning, the water glistening outside like a mirror of freedom. Eleanor came with me the day I moved in, carrying boxes, laughing when we struggled with the heavy ones. We set up my books on the shelves, arranged my photographs, brewed tea in my new kitchen. The space was modest, but every corner was mine. No echoes of demands, no shadows of betrayal, just quiet, peace, and the sound of Eleanor's laughter echoing against the walls. I began to join her in more community gatherings. We attended book club together, volunteered at the library, walked along the snowy lake path in the evenings. Slowly, the ache in my chest softened. My life wasn't filled with luxury anymore, but it was filled with something far more valuable: belonging. I was no longer a prisoner of my daughter's greed. I was no longer a widow locked inside memories. I was a woman who had chosen to step forward. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the water gold, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea. The air was crisp, the light fading, but my heart was warm. I whispered into the silence, "No longer a dispenser." The words were firm, final, and true. The machine was broken, and in its place stood something far greater: me. Spring arrived before I realized how quickly the months had passed. The lake outside my condo thawed, its surface shimmering with new life, and the world seemed to whisper that beginnings could come even after the harshest winters. Eleanor and I had grown close in those months, our friendship a steady rope across every fragile moment. One morning she looked at me over coffee and said, "You've been chained long enough, Irene. It's time to see the world." Her words stirred something in me I hadn't felt in years: curiosity, a hunger not just to survive, but to live. We planned a trip to Italy, a dream Robert and I once shared but never fulfilled. When the plane touched down in Rome, my heart raced like a girl's. The Trevi Fountain sparkled in the sun, the water tumbling in endless rhythm. Eleanor pressed a coin into my hand. "Make a wish," she said. I closed my eyes, the coin cool against my fingers, and whispered, "I am free." When I tossed it into the fountain, laughter bubbled out of me, sudden and bright, startling even myself. I hadn't laughed like that in decades. In Florence, we stood before the Duomo, the great dome rising against the sky. I traced the details of its walls with my eyes, marveling at the resilience of beauty that had survived centuries of storms. "Like us," Eleanor said softly, "we bend, but we do not break." I nodded, tears pricking my eyes, not from sadness but from awe. In Venice, we floated through the canals, gondolas gliding past as the sun dipped low. I leaned back, the water reflecting lights from the city, and laughed again, this time without restraint. For once, I wasn't a mother fighting to be seen, or a widow clinging to memories. I was simply a woman living. When we returned home, the condo welcomed me like an old friend. I set my suitcase down and walked straight to the balcony. The lake rippled in the evening breeze, the air crisp with the scent of pine. I poured a glass of wine and carried Robert's photo outside with me. Sitting in the fading light, I held the frame in my lap and whispered, "We did it." For a moment, the wind shifted, curling around me, and I almost felt his presence, warm and steady. I smiled through my tears. "I chose freedom," I said, and the words rang true. The stars blinked awake above the lake, one by one. I leaned back in my chair, the glass of wine catching their reflection, and let the night hold me. I was no longer a dispenser. I was no longer erased. I had fought, I had let go, and I had chosen life on my own terms. As the cool air brushed against my cheeks, I felt not 72, but timeless, renewed, alive, and finally at peace. The curtain of my old life had fallen, but the stage before me was wide open, waiting for every step I would choose to take.